The mules are in the corral. Welcome to Mule Talk, and I'm Cindy K. Roberts, your host.
And my sidekick, our author, TV personality, and world-renowned mule trainer, Meredith Hodges of the Lucky 3 Ranch. And we are going to be talking about, well, I call it playing beauty school dropout with your mules. And Meredith calls it, she has a different name for it. So Meredith, what are we talking about today?
We're going to be talking about maintenance and grooming, Cindy.
Okay.
And doing it in a cost-effective way because, you know, you've heard the old saying, horse poor. And I don't think there's anybody poorer than us on the planet. We've got a very expensive hobby.
Yes.
You know, if you want to call it a hobby. And
Right.
It's very difficult to even make any kind of profit from what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And here we are. We're producing animals that we like to ride and everything. A lot of people, I used to, but a lot of people now are taking up the breeding and selling of these extraordinary animals, and the quality has increased exponentially from what they were when I first started doing mules. But the main thing is if you're going to sell an animal, then he has to look good.
Oh, yeah.
You know, so you can get that top dollar for him. And so, you know, when we're talking about maintenance and grooming, we're always looking for a way that's cost effective for us to do things. And I found that putting up, for instance, the board fencing and wire fencing was eating me alive in maintenance costs, because our animals like to chew wood. And they like to sit on wire. And so about the only thing you could get away with would be hot wire fencing, but they even figure that out, how to short it out and get out. And then all of a sudden, you know, you got costs you didn't think you were going to have. Vet costs from getting tangled up in the wires, and then your neighbors get mad when they eat up their plants in their yard, and you know, all kinds of costs that just start coming up more and more all the time. And so, for instance, I have cattle on the north side of my property, but I had a vinyl fence I put up there because I found the vinyl was really very expensive up front to put it up. But my mules were very polite and thought I just got them a bunch of tinker toys. So when they start messing with that fence, they find out really quick that they can't really chew on it. It doesn't taste good. It doesn't really erode like a wood fence would. They can't really sculpt it, you know, and do what they like to do with that stuff. And so I was doing really well until they put the cattle on the other side. But the cattle on the other side, they're not quite so nice about the way they treat my fence. And where the mules just take the rails out, and then we can just put them back in and collect extras in case one gets broke or something. Just for instance, those vinyl boards are $45 a piece. So when they get broke and they have to be replaced, it can get very expensive. And the cattle, they break those boards.
Oh.
And they have barbed wire on the other side and that boar wire and everything, but the cattle go right underneath that and start on my fence. And they break those boards for a half a mile down that fence. And the maintenance costs are extraordinary. So we decided to go ahead and spend the extra money to put up a new pipe welded fence, 4 rails high, the whole half mile. And it's going to cost a bit to do that.
Sure.
And it does. But that fence is going to pay for itself because it will completely eliminate the maintenance costs. Whether you realize it or not, people get us coming and going in the equine industry on our maintenance and grooming costs. I have been looking for ways with as many animals as I have, not only to groom efficiently and keep it regular, but to buy tools that are fairly inexpensive but that will do the jobs. As soon as they put a stamp of for equine use on it, the price goes up.
Oh, yeah.
And you find yourself collecting all kinds of grooming tools that you really don't need and that your animal really doesn't like. You know, they have all those round little toothed grooming tools to get the dirt off of your mule and everything like that, and or horses too. But you got to realize that they may be tough animals, but their skin's not tough. Uh-oh. And you need to respect that. That would be like trying to run a metal grooming tool through your hair. You know, if you want to know what it feels like, just try it. You know, I did. And they twitch. You know, when a fly lands on them, that tells me they're sensitive.
Sure.
They can feel that, something as small as a fly. Yeah. So when you're using these things on them, you need to think about what you're using over their skin. And the other thing is that if you continue to use those kinds of tools, it will callus the skin and make it insensitive in wherever areas that it has regular repetitive use. And yeah, they may not twitch as much when the flies land on them, but it's affecting the foundation of their hair coat. Mm. And in order for the hair coat to work the way it was designed, it has to have good, healthy skin at the base so that the hair coat can stand on end. And it can't do that in scar tissue. And that's something that you may not even think about. But believe me, it makes a huge difference. So when I'm thinking about grooming, I want to be able to groom the animals weekly on the ideal. And of course, every time I use them. But a lot of times I find myself having to do it every other week with as many animals that I have.
Sure.
So I want to find the easiest way to do this. And while I'm doing it, I think about the environment, and I think about how to keep the flies and insects down in the environment, how to not be swarmed with swallows that build nests every spring in the barn and drip their poop all over the barn, which carries salmonella.
Yeah.
So when you're thinking about your animals being groomed and everything, you got to take it into consideration the environment that they're in. And so in order to keep the flies and other insects under control, all the stalls, runs, and pens need to be kept free of manure and debris daily. And you will find that if you do that cleaning daily, it doesn't take as long. If you let it build up, it's going to take you a much longer time to clean up big piles of stuff. And meanwhile, it's collecting insects and drawing flies and all of that. And all of these newfangled gimmicks of a way to handle these things is just that. They're gimmicks to sell another product at top price and take the money right out of your pocket. You know, so you want to clean your barns periodically and on a schedule every other week at the most, you know, every day for small stalls and runs, every week for larger pens, and fields and pastures need to be harrowed in the spring and the fall and in between hay cuttings. You'll find, too, that some animals have sensitive skin, and you really don't have to have fly masks that cover their ears and everything. When you clip their ears, you only clip the backs, and you leave the hair inside of the ears, and then you put fly masks on them. They're easy to find, most fly masks. I use those Farnham super masks. And most of them fit my mules just fine, but I don't have to put them on all the mules, and I never put them on my donkeys. I don't have to.
Wow.
What I found about those fly masks is they're just like anything else, like winter blankets and stuff. And when you put those on, it smashes the hair down. And then again, the hair cannot function the way it should with healthy skin that makes it stand up and insulates them from the heat and cold. And it also protects them from insects. The other thing that you need to do, too, in management of your animals is keep them in dirt pens. Feed them in the dirt pen, keep them overnight in the dirt pen. And donkeys, my donkeys, I don't let them out for turnout on pasture at all. They get incredibly obese immediately if you do.
That is the correct answer.
And so it's better just to keep them in a dirt pen, and if they want to eat grass, just take them for a walk, and let them eat grass while you're out for a walk. The mules can be exposed to their pastures starting with an hour at a time in the spring and building up to 5 hours maximum every day, and you let them out into the pasture for 5 hours. You would be surprised at how much this will limit the exposure to insects that will create sores on your animal and just harass them terribly. And then you find out that the only ones that really need to wear fly masks are the ones that have sensitive skin around the eyes. And if you have one that's a light-colored mule, for instance, and you have problems with sunburn, the fly mask will limit that as well. I haven't had to use any sunscreen on any of my lighter colored mules at all since I have been observing who needs a fly mask because of thin skin, because of the limited exposure on pasture. Those insects live in that grass. And they don't like it when an animal comes along and disrupts their environment. So they attack them. And that's how come you get such horrible sores on their legs. So you shouldn't put them out with leg wraps on because that smashes the hair. And if the hair gets smashed, it can't stand on end, right, and it can't repel insects. And the limited time, they're out there for 5 hours. How many eggs is an insect going to lay in their legs and in those delicate areas? And especially, how long are they going to stay there? If you're grooming every week or every other week,
yeah,
you can remove those.
Sure.
That in itself is just common sense when you start thinking about it like that. We worm our animals with ivermectin in January, March, May, July, and September, and then break the cycle with strongyne in November. And we have never had a parasite problem in 44 years. And I discovered something new when Sadie came back from Hearts and Horses. Don't suspect that they do that every other month, worm with ivermectin every other month, because when she got back here, we put her in the dirt pen with the South Barn mules. We do that so we don't have as many stalls to clean in the good weather. And when I put her out there, and there were flies out there, that was last fall, she got loaded with flies. They looked like she had fly boots on her legs, and there was a band of flies all the way across her belly, about 5 inches wide, all the way from the front legs to the back legs.
Yeah.
None of my other mules had that. So we gave her ivermectin, sprayed her with Tritec 14, Farnham Tritec 14, fly spray. I have found that is the best. It'll take a fly right out of the air, man, and they just die. Yeah. Oh, yeah. You can use it as fly spray in your tack room if you're in there and the flies are bugging you. Just take a couple shots of that. It'll knock them right out of the air.
All right.
Yeah, so this is very, very, very cool. And so I went ahead and treated her, and the next month, she didn't have those flies on her anymore. So I suspect that the body retains a certain amount of that ivermectin. Now, people have told me they will become immune. The flies will become immune to the ivermectin, and the worms will become immune to the ivermectin because of being used so often. But I contend that stuff stays in their system and stays there systemically and continues to repel the insects and the worms. And that's why we're not getting them. Because Sadie come around the next worming, she didn't have all those flies on her. She was back to where the other mules were, where she had a few buzzing around her and everything. But you hit those once a week with the fly spray. Even if I'm not grooming, I'll go out once a week and fly spray them, which is kind of cool because now we're talking about a routine that you have that is not going to take all your time. Now, I used to bring all the animals into the tack barn individually or in groups and go through the whole grooming process with them until I discovered that I really didn't have to do that. In the winter, for instance, they need that hair on them to keep them warm and to, well, there's no insects during the winter to speak of. So there really isn't a lot going on with their coats that needs to be groomed. But what they do instead is deplorable. They get out, and it rains or snows, and they get into that mud. Yeah. And they roll and carry on like that. And this is why I decided not to take them off the turnout pastures for the whole winter. Rather, we take them off the turnout pastures in the spring, in March, and let them have them during the wintertime because they will get covered with that mud. And it's just a major undertaking to get it off of them. Mm-hmm. And if you're going to go for a ride, by the time you get through grooming, you don't even feel like going for a ride anymore. You're too tired,
Yeah.
So being the efficient person that I am, I decided to watch them if I just didn't groom them. Oh. And do you know that those guys will go out into the grass, and the grass has a little moisture in it, and after the rain and snow and everything, and grass doesn't necessarily have mud puddles in it where they can get really bad, so if you can get them out on the grass and everything, then they look forward to the turnout, and they don't spend so much time being active in the dirt pen and the mud. They are just looking forward to going out on the grass. And when they get out there, that's where they do their rolling. And do you know they get that mud off themselves all by themselves?
Yeah.
So
wow.
If you wait for a few days, you won't have to groom that stuff off of them. They will do it by themselves. Now, again, this goes back to how you maintain your property and whether or not you're cleaning up those pens and everything, too. Because they figure if you don't care about cleaning up the pens, then you won't care if they roll in it. And in the pens, as the pens are cleaned and there's nothing to roll in, then the other thing is we put pea gravel on the grounds of the pens and the stalls. So when they do roll in it, the pea gravel takes that mud off too.
Oh, wow.
And it drains well in the pens, so you don't have those muddy spots. And you don't have them getting muddy up to their knees. And I found that when I first moved here, we had mud here that was like 3 feet deep. And I just started putting pea gravel in as often as I needed to until it finally got hard. And now we just keep a 4-inch base on it. When you do that, then you don't have to worry about dirty animals. You don't have to worry about their health being compromised. And because it's clean, it's all clean. The pea gravel is not a sharp rock. It's a roll, little round rock so that it doesn't chip their feet, but it's hard enough to keep their feet hard. And if you look at a lot of animals today, people are using hoof products on hooves.
Right.
And the next thing they're going to be looking at is collapsed feet because the feet get too soft.
Right.
When you keep Johnson's baby oil in the manes and tails, you don't have to douse it. People think it's too greasy. It's going to collect dirt, and all that. But it doesn't. Mm-hmm. If you just sprinkle it into the manes and tails, it also helps keep flies and insects at bay. When you inhale it, it feels like it's suffocating you. It will keep other animals from chewing on each other's manes and tails because they like to do that for mutual grooming. And heaven help you if you got a show mule and you don't want them all chewed up. The other thing is when they're doing mutual grooming, they're more polite about it. And if they don't have any itchy spots, they won't get crabby. And they don't bite and kick each other. They will warn each other when they're taught these good manners and treated right. All of this stuff, one thing ripples into another thing. And, if you're thinking about it, it all is related. What you feed your mules is related. For instance, when you're feeding them all these new research feeds and everything that are supposed to put weight on them and everything, a lot of times they make them obese. And a lot of times they're not as good for the animal as they say they are because they're really tested in a laboratory and not doing field testing on animals. And by the time they get to the animals, you find that they're colicking, they're foundering because the feeds are too rich, especially for our long ears.
Right.
But they're also that way for horses. And then they try to do it for convenience, too. Of course, we feed grass hay, crimped oats mixed with show glow vitamins and Mazola corn oil for the hoof and hair growth and for digestive tract regularity. Never feed alfalfa. It's too rich. A lot of the artificial hays are not good for them either. They're artificial. They are going to be like eating food with preservatives into them. And the other thing is they've got a lot of dehydrated feeds out there. They've got pellets, they've got hay cubes and things like that. And then they tell you that if you just put some water on them, they're okay. But no, they're not, because when those things get inside the animal, they dehydrate the digestive tract. And they actually will cause colic, choking, and other things. And then you got the vet coming, and there's more money down the tubes.
Right.
You got to think about these kinds of things, and there's nothing more healthy than what I just told you about, than grass hay. Oats are always healthy for the animals, and I even tested to see how much they liked them, and they will come off any pasture to come and get oats.
Oh, yeah.
That's number one. They love oats. So you can be the most popular person on the planet if you've got a fanny pack full of oats. and my mules have proven that. If you have to collect your mule manure piles on your place, keep them well away from the barns and the house. Personally, we have ours hauled away weekly to the dump and just take it out. People use them for the manure for their gardens and things like that. And they told me to put it on my hay field, but when I did that, I had nothing but weeds. When I put it in my garden, I had to weed very often. It just wasn't real healthy to do that. It's better to go ahead and research the chemicals that they want you to get for these places for plant growth. But you just research it with the thing in mind that you want to have something that's safe for your animal, and when you do that, it's a limited number of chemicals that you would even want to buy. But they are the best, and they've been around for a long time, and that's your first indication that it's probably safe and it's probably good to use. When you're trying to go organic, you're going to be infestated with all kinds of insects and that do horrible things to your crops. Then they try to sell them because they say they're more healthy for you, but how do you feel when you've got an apple that's got a worm in it? It's got a worm in it, it's got other things in it, mark my words.
Sure.
So all chemicals are not bad. You can't get of that mindset that anything is a chemical is bad, or anything you do like this is bad, or this is good, or whatever, These things are all related. Like I said, you need to clean all the manure from your sheds, your stalls, your pens regularly and daily in the smaller areas. But the other thing you need to do is keep your water sources clean. A lot of people will go, oh, gee, I got this big water tank, and I got my animals in a pasture, and it gets so dirty, and it's so hard to clean, I'll just let it go for a while. No, you don't want to do that. That's just another place for unwanted germs and things that could cause other problems with your animals, health-wise, to collect. So if you don't take care of that and you don't keep the water clean, your animals are going to get sick.
Right.
Mark my words.
I know.
same thing on their bodies. During that weekly grooming and everything, you're going to discover any scabs or bumps or cuts and stuff like that. And if they're not too deep and everything, you just take Neosporin and put it on them and they will go away. People are always talking about jack sores on the legs of these donkeys. My donkeys don't have jack sores on them, but what they're coming from is when they get itchy, they bite those certain areas. Oh. And if you don't catch it right away, it's going to get worse.
Right.
The other thing is donkeys tend to have runny eyes. But if you're grooming, or at least fly spraying once a week, you can wipe off their eyes with a towel. Sure. I use hand towels, get them wet with warm water, and just go out there and wipe that crud out of their eyes.
Yeah.
And my donkeys don't get those really runny eyes anymore. And the other thing that this regular grooming has done is lowered the incidence of respiratory. It lowers the incidence of respiratory problems in the spring. I used to have a respiratory disease go through my barn every spring. You would wake up one morning, somebody's got a runny nose and runny eyes, and pretty soon the whole barn has it. Well, we haven't had anything like that since we've been doing all this regular maintenance on the facilities and on the animals and on the feeding and all of the things that are interlinked. I don't believe in clipping animals when you're not showing. I know that you have to. If you want to be placed, you got to clip in a show. There's just that place is so ridiculous. And there are so many judges that cannot see through a hair coat. They really don't even know what a good movement is in good posture either. They don't get enough training to do that. I even showed under a welder once. Do you think he knew anything about equines? Not really, but they needed a judge that day. So you got to keep these kinds of things in mind too. And so getting back to the facilities and keeping them clean, if you keep your facilities clean daily and practice a few simple things like keeping your animals in the stalls clean, with that fly spray on them, with that systemic ivermectin in their bodies, this will repel the insects that collect in your barn. And the other thing you can do is if you put fans in the alleyway or fans in your shed, it will keep the birds from nesting in there. Birds don't like getting hit by a fan. So they're not going to make a home there. Right. I found that was a really good move that we did. Anyway, getting back to the show mules, when you're clipping the show mules, that's one thing. People say, oh, it's spring and I live in Florida and my animal's getting hot. Well, the weather changes. It's going to get hot, but it's also going to go back and get cold in the spring too. And if you clip them, you can't possibly monitor the blankets enough to keep that a healthy thing going. If you're going to blanket a clipped mule for show, the other thing that has to happen is they need 16 hours a day of light, or that coat is going to grow back. And then you're going to be clipping again and again. And that will irritate your animal. They get a really crabby attitude. And they don't like being confined in stalls. Long ears are particularly claustrophobic, although being confined in a stall will make any animal kind of mentally unstable. Sure. And it starts perpetuating vices like cribbing and all of that. And, of course, they've got things out there that you can buy to discourage that, like cribbing collars. If you want to have your animal in the pasture, they have muzzles you can put on them. How would you like to run around with a muzzle on to make sure you didn't eat too much? Just ask yourself that question. And if you did, how long would you be mentally stable?
Right.
Well, it affects our animals the same way. I don't believe in cribbing collars. I don't believe in muzzles or anything like that. I believe in managing your animals in a healthy way. And I've told you how that is. You just don't let them out on pasture more than 5 hours a day. And if you can't get there to let them out, get a friend to come over and do it for you. There are alternative ways to handle these things. besides feeling that you have to do it all. And if you exchange tasks and exchange things, trade with your friends, then it won't cost either one of you that much more either.
Sure.
So you just got to think in a logical sense and do things the way that they used to do them. You know, I mean, farmers used to loan each other equipment to get in their hay. They used to help each other do that. But when you got your whole brain in your back pocket and you think you have to do everything yourself, that really cuts the options to a bare minimum and the opportunities too. If you have a dirty facility, people throw the hay out there on top of manure in a pen. That's going to cause your animal to ingest things that are not healthy. So getting back to the clipping thing with the show mules, you know, you have to have that light on them to make it worth your while to clip them, but then you have to be diligent about when to put a blanket on, when not to, when to put 2 blankets on, when to take them off, because you can't just put them on and leave them on.
Right.
You know, because the weather doesn't do that. The weather does what it darn well pleases.
Sure.
But if your animal becomes overheated, they can get sick from that too. So you don't want that to happen. You know, you have to watch them very carefully when you're showing. There's just no other way to do that. And make sure that they don't. One of the things that they will do when they are starting to get sick is they will start to sweat a little bit and get heated up. And when they get heated up like that, take a whiff of the way their body smells. When they are not getting the right kind of food, first of all, the sweat will be kind of yellowish.
Ugh, yeah.
Right.
And it should run clear. And when they're not being fed the right food and they start sweating like that, and this is what happens in hotter climates, is they're not feeding the right foods. They're feeding this hyped up food that they've developed in a laboratory that isn't healthy for the animal. And so when they start sweating, it's because their internal organs are not working properly. Something is compromised. Toxins are going through the body. And when they are healthy, first of all, it takes a lot to make them sweat. They don't sweat right off the bat and turn into that yellow foam the way you see so often on so many animals. What happens is the sweat just runs clear and drops right off their body because there's no toxins in it. It's not sticky, and
Right.
it doesn't stink.
Right.
And
Meredith,
these are things that you can see yourself as an owner. And so, like at a show too, for instance, you got exposure to other people's animals, and they may not be maintaining them properly. But if you maintain yours properly, and you know that you're doing all the right things for your animal, first of all, don't let them drink out of community drinking things at a show. Bring your own buckets and take it from a faucet and give it to them that way. Just minimize their exposure to other animals. Don't get nose to nose. And of course, make sure that your vaccinations and everything are up to date. Your Coggins and health certificates are up to date. And even if you're just going to a small show, don't take that to mean, oh, gee, I don't have to get a Coggins, because Coggins are only good for like 3 months, and then you should do it again. Make sure that you're in the clear with your own animal, because that's the only one you got any control over anyway.
Right.
And if you do, then what you're going to end up with is an animal that's strong, who can resist disease, even with the exposure that he might get. And with the practice of kind of staying away from other people's animals when you're at a show, that will be just fine. With your equine, whether it's your equine or the facility that you're going to at a show, keep an eye out for anything that could injure your animal and remove it or repair it. And proper treatment of diseases and injuries depends on 2 very important factors: correct diagnosis and knowledge of the proper treatment. If you educate yourself by talking with your veterinarian regularly every time he comes out and asks him, why are you doing this? Why are you doing that? What can I do before you get here that might help? Then you will be educating yourself as to the things that you can do. So if you get to a show, or for instance, and something happens to your animal, or even if you're at home and something happens and your equine's not acting quite right, then you know the signs to look for, and you know the things that you could possibly do to help that animal before the veterinarian or farrier can get there. It's pretty easy to learn to diagnose animals with a little bit of education. After all, isn't that what they're supposed to be teaching you in college?
That is the correct answer.
And these vets ought to know that a lot of them, they can pass through college just as easily with C's and D's as they can with A's and B's.
Yeah.
And it's the big horse farms and the people in the big corporate industry that are going to get the best veterinarians. Unfortunately, it's people like you and me that are going to have to be satisfied with the run-of-the-mill veterinarians and people who are self-schooled. And that's not necessarily bad if you've got a veterinarian or a farrier that likes to increase his knowledge and is a learning kind of person. They can be even more valuable than the people that have been taught in schools.
Right.
Because they are less apt to be arrogant about their certificate, and more willing to share with you. So that's the kind of veterinarian and farrier you want to hook up with, not somebody that will just take your animal and tell you what's going on without sharing why. You need to do why. My veterinarians and farriers have shared things with me over the years, and my equine chiropractor and masseuse and all of that, so that I've actually learned how to do a lot of the things that they know how to do already, just through practice with them. That's like being an apprentice. And I personally think that being an apprentice is a really good way to learn.
Oh, yeah.
You get all the details, when you do that. There are a lot of resources available to help you learn how to be better prepared. There's books, there's clinics, and I strongly recommend going to these things and learning and finding coaches to help you increase your own knowledge. But don't let them become a crutch. Don't be the kind of person that needs to have them by your side to show you how to do everything or to do it for you.
Yeah.
You need to become independent that way. My vet, for instance, told me everything I would have to have in a first aid kit so that I could do these simple things before he gets there. Some of these things require prescriptions, but my vet knew I was learning from him, and when he thought I was ready, he would give me prescriptions to add to my first aid kit so that I would have them. You got to seek the kinds of immunizations that you're going to be doing. Ask your vet what's good for your area, because that will change from one area to the other because of the difference in the insects and the bugs and everything that infest those areas. The animals are going to be exposed pretty much across the country now with West Nile. So most of us have to do West Nile vaccinations, but in some areas they're not needed.
Wow.
So you check with your vet on that. You can see that there are other products that these people will put on you, like Coat Shine, Wonder Shampoos, and all of this kind of stuff, too. Quite frankly, when I was showing my animals, I realized that how I was feeding, how I was maintaining their facility, and keeping them, generally speaking, was really keeping them very healthy. And I didn't have to use any of those artificial products, thank God, because they cost an arm and a leg.
Right.
So my animals were coming up with shiny coats and all of that kind of stuff. The feet were healthy, and I would use the hoof shine stuff, the clear stuff on the light feet, and black on the black feet, and that kind of stuff for the show ring. But as soon as I got them home, I took it off because that has a drying agent in it. So you don't want to leave it on, because it will, their feet will start falling apart and chipping and getting pretty ugly if you leave it on and wait for it to wear off. So that's not a good thing to do. But what I found that was really helpful, I didn't like using the facility where they bathe animals at the show. I don't like using the facilities at a show because of particularly the bathing area where everybody bathes them right before the classes and everything. But I figured out a way to make my animals look really, really sharp and really shiny and really just as good as if you'd bathed them that very same day by simply keeping up this basic grooming and maintenance routine that I've been telling you about. But then before I start out for this show, I give them a bath at home. And when I give them the bath at home before a show, I go ahead and I use Tresemme shampoo, which is a very cheap human shampoo, but it comes in a lot of different kinds. And the one that I like to use is for broken hair, really just bad, thin, broken, split ends kind of hair. And that gets into the animal's hair coat and will help them to shine. And when they're clipped, that really does a super job on them. But I will go ahead and use that shampoo on their whole body and on their manes and tails. And then I use Aussie 3X moisturizing conditioner on the manes and tails. Not on the bodies, just on the manes and tails. And I give them their bath with that stuff. And then I take my equine vacuum cleaner to the show. So all I have to do is vacuum them between the classes. Like I said, when I get to the show and I have to show in a class, then all I have to do is go ahead and rough up their coat with a rubber curry to get all that dust to the surface, vacuum it off with my vacuum, and go ahead and still put a light, very light sprinkle of the Johnson's baby oil in the manes and tails, just enough to get rid of the frizz. And then I will take a hand towel and soak it in warm water and not completely wring it dry, but I'll go over their whole body with that to take the excess dust off of them. And it leaves that's as good as, if not better, than using a baby wipe, which has things in it. It has products in it that could, interact with the skin, but just water on a towel, not a problem.
Okay.
Nobody gets allergies. Nobody gets sores. Nobody gets any of that kind of stuff. They start nipping at their bodies when it starts to itch. And a lot of those things, like I say, have preservatives in them and things that will affect their skin and make them itch,
All right.
You keep those things in mind when you're going to a show. And as I said, I do the baths at home. I just don't go there. I keep my stalls clean. It used to enrage me because I watched the way the National Western Stock Show cleaned the area where all the stalls were set up. First of all, my biggest gripe was that they put all those stalls on a concrete slab.
Yeah.
And then your animal has to stand on it for a 4 or 5 day straight period, which is totally unhealthy for their bones. Think about these salespeople that have to work in a retail store and stand on concrete all day long.
Yeah.
I've worked that way. I know what it feels like. It does not feel good, and it cannot be healthy. All these little things, if you need to, you can think about how you would feel in that situation. We've got hoof picks and stuff that we may want to use. You don't have to use them daily or weekly unless your animal is being shown. And in which case, there's a lot of people out there that, the nails that go through the feet are not healthy for your animal. Well, if you're only shoeing every 6 to 8 weeks, then the growth on that foot is going to come really close to eliminating the nail holes the next time he gets trimmed.
Yeah.
That is the correct answer.
So it's how often do you do it? And if you leave them barefooted, then, chipping can always be an issue depending on the ground that you're riding on and how long you're riding, and all of those kinds of things. What you're doing and the surface you're riding on is really important. Now, a lot of these shows, they make it look good by going out and harrowing the arena before classes and stuff, and they'll let a couple classes go by, and then they go out and harrow the arena. But if you walk out into that arena and you take some of that dirt in your hand, you're going to see it's got a lot of rocks in it, because most of them don't want to resurface their arenas with sand as regularly as they should. And when they don't, your animal's out there showing on things that are chipping his feet. And that's why it's important to know what you're going to do with your animal and shoe him appropriately. It's bad enough that they go to a show and they've got multiple pleasure classes that they run, and they're out there for a minimum of 20 minutes and usually an average of 40 minutes per class on that kind of a surface. So if they're going to do that, go ahead and put regular shoes on them for the show. If you're going to go trail riding in the mountains, go ahead and put shoes on them for the terrain that you're going to encounter on your trail ride. If at a show you're going to be doing reining classes and you're going to be sliding those back feet across those surfaces, which you don't have much knowledge of ahead of time anyway, just be careful and put slider plates on them. So that it's the slider plate that takes the concussion on the back feet that's sliding across it. Regular shoes do not slide, and they will put pressure on the pasterns and the fetlocks when they try to sit down and slide on those kind of shoes. And that will put undue stress on the animal's back legs and his back, because he has to round his back and tuck his whole hind end underneath him to do that. If you're going to be jumping, bear in mind that the landing can get kind of tricky. So you don't want regular shoes on your jumpers either. You want to put shoes with borium beads on them to give those shoes a little bit of traction, so that when he puts his feet on the ground, he can stop the front feet, let the back feet land, let them get their traction on the ground before they propel him back up into the canter or whatever gait you're riding. If you're going to be showing your animal in a parade, that asphalt that they're going to be riding on is slick, and they're going to be fighting their balance all the way down the parade route. Same solution. Put your shoes on with borium beads on them. And then when you're done with the parade, take them off. I leave my animals barefooted most of the time until I encounter a situation that I know I'm going to be in. And this takes pre-planning. Think about what you're going to be doing. Plan how you're going to handle it before you even get there. Plan how you're handling your daily routines before you even get there. And develop your own routine to go ahead and fit your regular daily things that you like to do. One of the most common excuses that I hear from people is, I don't have enough time to do what you're saying. Well, you don't have enough time not to do what I'm saying, is what I say to them.
Yeah, good point.
Because when you do all these things that I've outlined, including the workouts in the hourglass pattern, in the elbow pull to develop good posture, which will keep your animal healthy, because when they're in good posture, they're not abusing the bones in their body. They're not abusing the internal organs. When you're feeding them properly, they're going to be healthy. When they're getting out enough, they're going to get enough exercise by themselves. And simply after 2 hours of 15 to 20 minutes a week with each one of your animals, which is not much time to spend, they can go out after 2 years and practice what you've taught them. So you don't even need to ride them anymore. All you need to do to get ready for a show is start 3 months ahead and do bulk training exercises to build up the bulk muscle. because your core muscle is going to stay. Core muscles stick with them, and that's really easy to identify. And so you can watch your animals and turn out and see who's not standing square when they're resting. That's the one that needs to go through the hourglass pattern. 15, 20 minutes once a week, and only once if they've had the 2 years, because they'll go, oh, yeah, Mom, you're reminding me of my good posture. That's like my grandmother putting a book on my head. You know, you don't need to keep doing it. You just need to be reminded of how you walk when you do it. That's what they do, and that's how they stay with it. You know, getting ready 3 months ahead of time, knowing what classes you're going to be riding in, is really easy to do. You already got the core muscle built up. You just got to put the belt muscle over the top. So you do that. And then when you're practicing those classes, if you're going to be doing reining, just go ahead and go into the hourglass pattern and practice under saddle, practice over obstacles, and then run your patterns as the patterns go. Don't try to avoid doing a pattern because you're afraid he might get stuck. He's already doing the hourglass pattern, but more than that, your animal is listening. He has learned to listen to your aids, both on the ground and under saddle and in the drive lines. He knows what they are, so he's not wasting his time memorizing patterns. He's attentive and listening to you. So when you go in there and the reining pattern is not the same one, it doesn't matter. When you go in there and the jumping order is not the same one, it doesn't matter. He's learned to jump. He's learned to stay in good posture. He's learned to listen to your aids and to you. He's learned to wait and not run off because he knows what you're going to tell him to do is the right thing to do, because no longer is he trying to prove to you that, oh, this is the wrong thing to do. You know, that went away with the groundwork. So you see what I'm saying about all this is, don't worry about all those little things, you know, that you think might be the wrong thing. If you spend the time doing all of the right kinds of things to your animal all the way along the line, then he's going to behave, whether he's in a show, whether he's trail riding, or whether you're just out riding for pleasure. And I might add, too, that there's a lot of times when you don't have time for singular grooming and bringing him up and all this kind of stuff. And I really don't, with as many things that I have to do. So what I do, I have learned that seasonally there are certain things that require certain tools. And sometimes, you know, like in the spring and shedding time, I don't really need anything but the shedding blade, my human hairbrush, plastic hairbrush, and a bottle of baby oil and my vacuum cleaner at one time during the shedding. I will begin with just the plastic brush, the baby oil to put in the manes and tails, and your wet rag to wipe off their eyes and their nostrils and their ears, the weekly grooming. And it gets a little hairy, you know, as it's coming out.
Right.
But at the point where it's coming out in clumps is when you want to bring in the vacuum cleaner. Before that, you really don't have to.
Right.
And all those other tools are absolutely worthless. And if you try to use a shedding blade to get mud off or anything like that, you're going to end up breaking their hair, and it's not going to be healthy, and it's not going to shine up for the show because they'll have split ends, and you created them with that shedding blade. What I do is I very carefully, if they got a little bit of mud on them when they're shedding, I pick a day when they've already rolled in the grass and gotten most of it off. That's a choice of mine, and it's a very, you know, calculated choice. Then I will go over them and just get the areas that are carrying mud and then do the rest of the body with that plastic human hairbrush. That thing is the best thing I ever discovered, and they're cheap.
Oh, yeah.
You know, they don't cost an arm and a leg, and you can get a whole bunch of them at once in case you break them, you know, and that kind of thing.
Wow.
And like I said, I keep them barefoot, so I don't have to go through with the hoof pick and get out the mud. They can do that by themselves in the pea gravel, too. I carry my grooming tools in a bucket. I carry my fanny pack full of oats, and I have another bucket full of oats so I can refill the fanny pack. If the weather is bad outside, I will do them in the alleyway of the barn, and I just lead them all out of their stall and tie them all on one side. And first I go down with the rag and wipe out everybody's noses and eyes and ears and everything and get that done. Then I go back to the front of the line again, and I get all the mud down the line that I have to get off and do the plastic hairbrush over the whole body while I'm doing that and get most of that hair shedded out. Then I will go ahead and go down the line again with the vacuum cleaner and get out even more of the hair that's ready to come out, because when it gets clumpy like that, it's coming out in globs. And even if you use the hairbrush, it'll come out in globs with the hairbrush, but it's still leaving tiny hairs in there that are just barely hanging on, and the vacuum will pull those out. And having them all in a line like that, I feed them each time I go down the line. Oh, you're standing still for me for the head wipe. Good. Here's your handful of oats. And I go down the whole line like that, And, oh, good, you're standing still for the hairbrush. Good. Oh, you're standing still for the vacuum. That's good. And then I come back and I do the same thing with the baby oil and the manes and tails. Now, when I'm doing the vacuum cleaner, you have to realize that I have an extension cord on that vacuum cleaner because I have 10 mules lined up in this barn.
Oh, yeah.
I'm dragging the cord behind them, and they have to be used to that. Sometimes when they learned about the vacuum cleaner and the cord in the tack barn, when I had them all standing next to each other, 6 on one side, 6 on the other, and I had to go down the line with the vacuum cleaner, and I would come up between them from behind. But the vacuum cleaner was plugged into the wall. So they all learned how to step over the cord. When I got to them, I would drag the vacuum cleaner down the back. I would do the first mule, go to the second one, and the first mule's done, but I'm going up on the second one. So I would tell the first one, step over the cord. I don't want you tripping on it, and I don't want it to get tight on me. And I just say, move over. And they step right over the cord upon command. And they all learn to do that. So they all learned that the cord is not a spooky thing. So when I do them in the barn instead of in the tack barn, and they're all lined up on one wall, dragging that cord behind them is not an issue. And then when I get to the end of the line, I have to roll it back up. And, of course, it's got an extension cord on the end. So what I do is I roll up the extension cord, get to where it plugs into the vacuum cleaner, unplug that, then I roll up the cord on the vacuum cleaner, put the cord over my shoulder, and walk behind all these guys. And I've only got probably, with them standing with their butts out to me, I've got about a 4 or 5 foot walkway behind them. But nobody is spooking. Nobody is kicking. Nobody even raises a leg to me. And if they do, they had that kind of training in the tack barn when they were on opposite sides and I had to walk down the middle of their behinds. Because if they so much as raised a foot, I would yell at them and go, say their name and say, put that down. Uh-oh. And they learned to do it very firmly. I mean it, That comes in handy everywhere when they're out in the dirt pen and they're getting fed on the dishes along the rail and they're starting to fight with each other. I go, lady, you leave Guy alone. And they just stop what they're doing right there.
You have eyes in the back of your head.
They think I do.
Right.
Actually, I just watch them very carefully. But that's a good way, when you're doing it in a factory fashion, doing everything the same with everybody down the line. Everything the same with everybody down the line.
Right.
Grooming goes really fast.
Mm-hmm.
And I do it in the south barn, then I'll move to the north barn and do exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
And just tie them up on the wall, and everybody knows what's coming, and everybody is really happy about it. And the happiest thing they are with is the fact that every time they stand still while I'm doing something, they get a handful of oats. and I don't shovel them to them.
Right.
I give them to them after they've let me do what I'm doing.
Meredith, what kind of energy drinks are you drinking? You have so much energy. I need to know this.
Well, the answer is really very simple, and it doesn't come in a can.
Okay.
It comes from being around mules and donkeys. When I see how happy they are when I take the time to look at them and do what's best for them, it makes me happy. When I see other people who listen to our podcast, when I hear about other people who are listening to our podcasts or using our books and videos and are deriving the same kind of joy from their animals, that's what gives me energy.
Oh, yeah.
I don't get it in a can. I have learned to despise things in a can. Yep. I can't even drink more than 1 cup of coffee, and weak coffee at that, in the morning.
There you go.
Because all of my energy and all of my joy comes from being around long ears and from teaching other people and sharing with them the things that I have learned being around mules and donkeys. They are amazing, and they have so much to share with us, and it makes life so much easier and so much better when we go ahead and learn from them instead of fighting it, you know? You just admit how stupid you are.
That is the correct answer.
You know? And go with it. You know, that was one of the best lessons I ever learned.
Yeah.
And everything that we're talking about here today can be found in my books, Training Mules and Donkeys, A Logical Approach to Long Ears, Training Without Resistance, Equine Management and Donkey Training, Equus Revisited, and A Guide to Raising and Showing Mules, and all of my video series. And there's a lot to learn in the documentary series, too. And if you want to get an overall summary about how well this all works, then go ahead and either purchase Rock and Roll, Diary of a Rescue in DVD, or just watch it on video on demand on my website under training.
Very cool, Meredith. Well, it's lunchtime.
It is. You have a great rest of the day, Cindy.
If you'd like to be a sponsor, send me an email.
everycowgirlsdream@gmail.com.
Gotta go. My mule is looking for me.
Mule Talk is an Every Cowgirl's Dream production.